The annual Virtual Rainbow brings together LGBTQ+ youth and their families, healthcare providers, community members, and other professionals to learn about and celebrate diversity and inclusion. Thank you for joining, everyone, and welcome. It is my pleasure to introduce our next session. The title of this session is Interrupting Microaggressions Through Bystander Intervention Training. And I'm very happy to introduce our two speakers. Bryce Hughes is an assistant professor of education at Montana State University. He has long been involved in queer advocacy and scholarship in higher education, including founding the LGBT Resource Center at Gonzaga University, publishing the first paper to document LGBTQ retention in STEM, and earning a very prestigious NSF Career Award to study LGBTQ experiences in STEM. Amber King is an assistant dean in the Dean of Students Office here at Montana State University. She has extensive experience facilitating violence prevention presentations and trainings to MSU students on bystander intervention, consent, healthy relationships, and confidential resources available to students. She has also facilitated dialogue among students volunteering for the Campus Sexual Assault Office in the Peer Education Program. And you can read more about Bryce and Amber on our website. Bryce and Amber, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
I printed the wrong thing. Bryce, did you want to start things off?
Why don't you go ahead and start? I think our positionality is next, right?
Yes, yeah. And I didn't know, thank you for the introduction. Like Paul said, I am the assistant dean of students at MSU, but worked extensively with sexual assault prevention prior to this. I'm also a fourth-year PhD student in the Adult and Higher Education program at Montana State University, and working with Dr. Bryce Hughes as my advisor. When we sat down and talked about this, he was the expert on all things microaggressions, and I was the expert on all things bystander intervention, and we thought, wouldn't it be interesting if we could use one to make changes with the other? So that's where this idea came from.
I think I had just written a paper. I don't know if I would call myself an expert in all things microaggression, but I had just written a paper and published it on anti-LGBTQ microaggressions at a Catholic university. And that was part of the inspiration then when we started talking about work that we could do together. My name is Bryce Hughes, and I'm an assistant professor in the education department, as Paul mentioned. I think I will go ahead and transition us to our positionality statement then. Because this session focuses on microaggressions, we also feel it relevant to reveal our positionality relative to the topic in a manner that, that was for the proposal. Masks are identities. That was written for a proposal. That piece didn't get edited out. Each of us reflected on the places where we hold targeted and dominant social identities, and meaning that we each have experienced and likely perpetrated microaggressions ourselves. In terms of my different social identity memberships, I identify as white, I identify as a man, I identify as gay, I identify as middle to upper socioeconomic status, I identify as able-bodied. There's a number more that I know we'll touch on today, but each of those has led to experiences of primarily privilege, but also oppression as well, and thus the learning that I've been involved with around drawing attention to microaggressions and helping reduce them.
Awesome. And I also identify as white. I identify as a woman. I'm cisgendered. I identify as bisexual. I identify as able-bodied, U.S. citizen. And like Bryce said, there are many other things I identify with, but those are the key pieces that I wanted to point out today.
We also want to provide a brief content warning. I think it's somewhat evident because we're talking about microaggressions. The topic may bring up experiences or other kinds of feelings that folks may have had in the past, that we want to make sure that you know that you can take care of yourself as you need. You can take a break if you need during this session. And yeah, just check in with yourself and feel free to participate as you would like.
And same for the piece of, we're not going to be getting into sexual assault prevention education, but maybe talking about that within the bystander intervention model. So again, being aware of taking care of yourself, using this as a brave space, but going for a walk if you need to take care of yourself, or knowing that there are advocates that you can contact for support.
So the first question that we'd like to ask, just to get a sense of the knowledge that each of you are bringing to this session already, is what do you know already about the topic of microaggressions? Do you want to click a couple of those bullet points up there?
Yeah.
So take a moment to reflect on this question, and I think it might be easier not to do the breakout sessions for this part, but to save that for later. Take about a minute or two to reflect on how you would respond to this question. And then after you've had a chance to think about it, start posting how your responses in the chat for the session. And after a couple minutes, we'll read through some of those.
I don't know if this is blocking my screen, but I'm pulling up the chat just so I can see what you're all saying.
If you'd like, Amber, I can monitor the chat for you.
Fantastic.
Oh, thank you, Miha. Miha mentioned in the comments to shift from using the phrase or using the term able-bodied and just identifying as not disabled.
Thank you.
I'll go ahead and read a couple of the responses that have come in so far. It's okay if you're still reflecting, if you still want to post something. So first, I see one, words or phrases someone uses that are harmful, but might not be intended to cause harm. And similarly, put downs disguised as compliments, an unintentional statement or action towards someone that is offensive or prejudiced, acts or questions directed at people of color or another marginalized identity that does harm, subtle negative displays of power, less intentional statements or actions that are based in stereotypes and prejudices, and also a ditto on another post. The act of disparaging another in a subtle way, words or actions included. Learned behavior complacently perpetuated. I think that's important too. It comes through socialization. Putting someone down in a way that they can plausibly claim to be unintentional. Unintentional, part of cultural phrases that are so ingrained that we don't even notice them, can also be intentional, passive aggressive commentary. Yes, all of these relate to all of these help show that we have a pretty solid consensus definition. We'll go ahead. I think the next slide, I'll introduce. Oh no, we have a video, if I remember right, that comes next. Then I will talk about the taxonomy of microaggressions.
Great, and I will attempt to start this video correctly.
Oceanside Verbo is about to
ignore the advertisement on whatever this is.
Ew, get off of me.
Amber, you need to change it so you're sharing the browser and not PowerPoint.
Thank you. Right. Sure. Can you see my screen now with the video?
Yep.
Okay, let's start again.
Sophie, go to little girl's room for a minute, okay?
So excited. Oh my work.
Can you do it already?
There's going to be some things that you're going to be able to get that other people in the office don't get. One of them, gym membership.
You want me to lose weight?
I don't want you to.
No, you're missing the site. That's what you're doing. We're missing the action.
Oye, sabrosura. You want to have some ice cream with my friend of me?
Get lost, greaseball.
Microaggressions are along a continuum from being very deliberate and conscious to being outside one's conscious behavior. We identified 3 types of microaggressions. Microassaults, which are very similar to old-fashioned racism.
Your kind don't understand English. My kind?
The other types of microaggressions are more insidious, hidden, subtle, and the second type is a micro-insult. A couple of color comes into a restaurant to be seated. They're seated in a more undesirable place than a white couple who might be coming in.
Did you see any white people in there waiting an hour and 32 minutes for a plate of spaghetti? Huh? And how many cups of coffee did we get?
You don't drink coffee, and I didn't want any.
Man, that woman in there poured cup after cup to every single white person around us. But did she even ask you if you wanted any?
A micro-invalidation assailed their racial identity and self-esteem. Let's say African Americans, they are dangerous and criminal.
You see that?
Wait, she's cold.
She got colder as soon as she saw us, though.
Oh, man, come on, don't start.
Man, look around you, man. You couldn't find a whiter, safer, or better lit part of this city right now.
There can be racial microaggressions, sexual orientation microaggressions, disability microaggressions, and gender microaggressions. Catcalls, staring at a woman's breasts or legs. It's a microaggression because it fulfills the theme of what we call sexual objectification.
I love the fact that you're a grandmother.
Oh, God!
You are! You're a hot grandma!
Oh, my God!
Environmental microaggressions are a hostile and invalidating climate. If you choose to stay, you will be uncomfortable.
Yo, Mook!
A couple of words of pie.
Mook! What? Come you got no brothers up on the wall?
Man, ask Sal, right?
Hey, Sal, how come you got no brothers up on the wall here?
You want brothers on the wall? Get your own place. You can do what you want to do.
Making trouble? Yeah, I'm a troublemaker. I'm making trouble.
You both break. Who's coming in here looking for trouble? Suppose I busted your head.
Microaggressions are cumulative, and any one may represent the feather that breaks a camel's back.
Clear the bush. You said you were going to get Jose to do it.
He your garden, why you don't tell him?
Lucy, you know I don't speak Mexican.
I'm not a Mexican.
How unpopular Vietnam was. I'm not Vietnamese, I'm American.
What, you think I'm gay? Aren't you? What's the matter with you? Do I look gay to you? Do I look gay to you?
You're a good-looking man.
Thank you.
Very pretty. Real soft, delicate features. They're real feminine, you know, which is good for me. me, because that would be a simple sort of transition, you know what I'm saying? Maybe throw a little rouge on you, tuck your sack back, you get.
Are we back to the slideshow?
Yep.
Great.
So this is a quick overview of what Daryl Dwing Sue, one of the researcher that was interviewed in the video, who wrote one of the seminal pieces about microaggressions, how he and his research team came up with a taxonomy on how to think about and organize the different types of experiences that people have to give us kind of a framework and a language around it. The one piece I always want to emphasize here, the micro part of microaggression in the name does not mean that the impact of the experience itself is small. Sometimes it can be small. Often, even if it's small, it's building on top of a number of other experiences. And sometimes what might be perceived as small to the perpetrator is not experienced as small to the individual who is the target. What it gets at is that it's on the micro level, it's happening between individuals, but it's an act that perpetuates broader systemic oppression, say systemic racism, systemic sexism, and so on. Microaggressions, the phrase was coined back in the 70s to talk about the common everyday slights and slurs that African Americans faced that became more commonplace as the form of racism in the US following the reduction of some of the more overt forms. Not that they've completely gone away, but a way of talking about the fact that there were other ways that racism was experienced that wasn't as visible to people who are in the dominant group. Again, I think many people mention this, that they were typically not intended to offend, but it has a negative impact. Some of them, the intention is not a good intention, but many of them, the person is surprised to realize that they may have perpetuated one because their initial intent was, no, I thought I was complimenting you. The three different categories that Dr. Sue talks about then are micro invalidations, micro insults, and micro assaults, and those progress from the most covert to the most overt. Some micro assaults, I mean, could fall into the category of just simply overt discrimination. I think we can move to the next slide.
There you go.
Do we have these tables?
Yes,
I think we usually
in the box folder. If you want to use this, or whatever.
I don't want to do the whole activity because I want to save time for our case studies, but what I would put a link to these taxonomies. So what we've put together are tables that you can look at after this session where one side gives examples of types of microaggressions that people might experience, and then it gives you an opportunity to reflect on each of those statements. What's the unintended message that the microaggression might be communicating to the target? The reason we don't, I think we'll save time for the, what's it called? Case studies, I'm sorry. I'm just going blank here. Is some of this was also developed for a little bit more time, but we wanted to make sure that we could condense this down for the format of this particular conference. But we want to make sure that you have copies of these handouts. They also have reference lists for folks who want to do more reading.
All right.
I'll turn it over to Amber.
Yeah, now it's my turn to talk about bystander intervention, but first we're going to use this iceberg of violence. This is something you might have seen similar representations of this analogy to indicate what we see and what hides underneath the surface as far as violence goes. So at the MSU Voice Center, which was the Sexual Assault Prevention Center, we use this visual to show that what we see is classic violence, which is the top of the iceberg, things that we actually see and acknowledge as violence, compared to hidden violence, which is the bottom of the iceberg. Pieces that definitely keep that iceberg afloat are definitely violence, but are not seen as classic violence outwardly. you'll see that microaggressions falls underneath the surface. And the theory is that the pieces underneath the surface keep the iceberg afloat. So if we ignore things like microaggressions, language and jokes, stereotypes, this can lead to overt violence and harm for others. So this is the bystander intervention model that we used again in the MSU Voice Center. We're going to go kind of counterclockwise in this piece and go through what is called the 4 Ds. Since we did this presentation, we initially came up with this idea and did this presentation for ACPA in Boston about 2 years ago. And since then, there have been some articles that were published, not by us because we're busy, on using micro interventions to challenge microaggressions, which I feel is, a good idea of connecting this bystander intervention model with microaggressions, or to challenge microaggressions. So we'll start with direct, since that is the main one, or the most obvious one. When we directly intervene, we often see this as calling someone out or calling someone in. We're basically acknowledging the behavior and asking how you can help stop it. The next is distract or distraction. This intervention calls the attention away from the situation, and maybe that's changing the topic or bringing the focus onto something else. When I worked with the student peer leaders in the Voice Center, they would get really creative with this strategy, and the focus obviously was on sexual assault prevention. One student used an example of when she was out at a bar, she saw someone dance up onto one of her fellow students. She didn't actually know that student, but she recognized them from campus. And she could tell that student was very uncomfortable. So she kind of danced over and said something like, "Hey, aren't you in my English class? Can I buy you a drink?" And this gave the student the out to leave the situation where they were uncomfortable with that, the educator. Third is delegation, and oftentimes someone else might be the best person to intervene in a situation, or you might want to bring additional people into a situation so that you're not doing things alone. We have power in numbers. In the classroom environment, this might look like delegating the intervention to the professor, as they likely have the most authority in the classroom. And finally, there's delay. This seems to be the most controversial, or I get the most conversation about this intervention. And people feel like to delay is to do nothing, but I really feel like to delay is to empower individuals to talk about the microaggression or the interaction that happened, and kind of check in with the person that the microaggression was against, maybe later on. Because sometimes directly intervening in a situation can be dangerous to you or the person or the recipient of the microaggression. So you might want to check in with that person later and offer your support. You might want to process with someone else or a group of people about how they could have intervened or what their thoughts were about that interaction. And then maybe have an intervention follow-up later after the fact. So I know that was, a lot of information in a tiny amount of time. We're definitely going to practice these skills, but just wanted to see if there were any questions before we move on to the practice part. All right, I'm assuming there's nothing in the chat box because I can't see it. But you can definitely.
Sorry about that. No, you feel free to post questions as they come up too. We're happy to. I'm going to keep monitoring this.
All right. So this is like I said, we're going to practice it, and there's no time like now. So we're going to break into small groups and breakout rooms, and you're going to get a scenario. Just to be mindful, Bryce and I wrote these scenarios pre-COVID, so there may be some pieces that don't actually work in our current pandemic world, but you can just imagine what it used to be like in 2019. And then you'll read through the scenario and discuss it with your group, and then be prepared to share out when we return. Obviously discuss the microaggression presented and what the impact to the target may be, and then determine a response. And you might use all 4 of the Ds, direct, distract, delegate, and delay, or you might only use one. But I think it's important to talk about honestly how you see yourself responding to a scenario, and being compassionate with yourself, because often these times or these situations are emotionally charged and they can feel very scary and dangerous. And so I oftentimes have students coming in saying, oh, I would always directly intervene. And in the reality, direct might not be what they actually choose when it comes down to the actual situation. So I think, Bryce, you should be able to put the link to the folder of the scenarios in the chat.
Yes, let me make sure I just want to make sure that the permissions are set for that.
Well, if I didn't do that, I can pop out and fix that. Or you can fix it.
I got it. Yep.
Okay.
So what we'll have you do is go, the folder has multiple files, right?
Yeah, but they should each have a number. And I think when you're put in a breakout room, your breakout room has a number. I may be wrong. If I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, the breakout rooms will have a number. I was just trying to make sure that when you look at the folder, it's multiple case studies, and then you just pick the number that matches the breakout room that you're in. So I put a link in the chat there, and I believe I've set it so that anybody who has the link can view what's there and download the files. If you have any trouble, send me a note. I will help troubleshoot that. But otherwise, I think we're ready to start our breakout sessions. And I would say we might check in after about 10 or 15 minutes. You may want to take up to 20 minutes because it takes a moment to read through the scenario, maybe even introduce yourself to the people in the group, and then to start to talk through how you might respond. Given the fact that you probably aren't going to pick one of the 4Ds, you might actually pick a couple and bring them together.
Are we ready for the breakout rooms?
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Okay. All right, here we go.
Great.
Oh, I see. Yeah, there are probably going to be some people who... Oh, I see. We're our own breakout room. There are some people who I think may have stepped away from their computer too, so I wouldn't get too worried about that.
Yeah.
If we want, we can be in, we're our own breakout room. We're number 6.
Are any of the other people on their screens right now?
Well, I'm wondering, did Bryce and Amber, did you want to go to different rooms just to check in and see how the conversation maybe help?
Yeah, and it does look like we might need to move somebody from room 5 to 4 because there's somebody by themselves. The other folks haven't joined those ones. But yeah, I did want to kind of go through and just make sure everybody's been able to access the files and stuff like that.
Okay, I did that. I moved the person from 5 to 4. We are in group 6. You don't have to join though. And also, Amber, when you share your screen when we come back, the little like gray blocks that are kind of floating around, you can kind of take them away by like sharing your screen but not clicking the optimized video. If you have no more, if you have no more video anymore, you can just press the button that says like don't click the optimized video, and you won't have those little blocks that kind of come up, and you don't have to worry about it. You can see the chat after that.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, this is like when I'm teaching, I'm going to go pop around and make sure everybody was able to get what they needed.
Bryce, do you want me to move you around?
Oh, I can actually do it. I can pull up the thing and click join and leave and
Oh,
join
yeah.
and leave. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I'm familiar with how this works in WebEx. It's pretty similar to Zoom from what I can tell.
Was it 1040 or 1045 that we were thinking?
I would aim for 45 to give them at least 15 minutes. I just can't remember the last time I did this, how long people needed.
Yeah, because then I think when they come back to the larger group, my hope would be that there would be some discussion in the larger group. And I think that the people really like discussing the different scenarios.
Yeah. Do you want do you have the ability to do the broadcast message to all? Because if that's the case, you can put the time, or I can put it.
You could do it. I have no idea how to do that.
I don't know if I see that. I can see the breakout rooms, who's in them, and I can click join and jump into them.
Okay.
But I don't think I see the thing about broadcasting a message there.
Oh man, how do I say at 10:45 when some people have different time zones?
I guess you could just say 10:45 Pacific Standard Time and people can do math.
Or oh, that's right. It's 9:45 with you all. 11:45.
11:45 with us.
Yeah, it'll be 11:45 here, but I'm so used to this
11:45 Mountain Time.
just doing all these time zone things in my head all the time anymore with all this virtual stuff.
No, and I just traveled to Mexico and their daylight saving time switched randomly. It's not like ours, so they change it like 2 weeks later. So I had experienced my change, and then I went over there, and that was a time change, and then they changed it again, and then I came back. And I was like, oh boy.
3 weeks, yeah.
Trying to get some sleep. Okay, so I think everything's solid. Yeah.
So I don't know if I have access to pop around. Bryce, how do you see that?
At the bottom of the window there, I have a thing that says breakout rooms with 4 boxes. And when I click on it, it shows me the different rooms. Hopefully I can leave the room. I guess I should be able to.
You should be able to, yeah.
I have one that says join breakout room. Oh yes, now I can see it. Okay, fantastic. We only have 4 rooms because it looks like there's our room.
Yeah.
Room 5 doesn't really exist because it's Jody and she's with us right now. Okay. So do you
I think there are times people step away from their computer during some of these presentations, and that's okay. It happens.
Do you want to visit room 1 and 2 and I'll visit room 3 and 4?
Sounds good.
Great. See how this goes.
Thanks, Danny, for all the help on this.
Oh, and how to bring it back to your own college, which I guess we could talk about here too.
Oh, now that I'm thinking about it, would it be easier to do a chat share out or a?
I think it's easier, whichever people are comfortable with. If they'd like to chat,
I'm just thinking from the technical standpoint. I don't remember if we've made it possible to unmute in the large room.
I don't know.
I can do it.
Oh, great.
Oh, yay. Okay. That answered our question. Thank you.
No problem.
We'll give folks a little bit more time to come back from their break. Oh, they must have just automatically ended.
Yeah.
Well, we'd like to invite a share out from some of the discussions that you had in your breakout rooms. If there's somebody who would be willing and maybe even a little brave to be the first, who'd like to share out a very brief synopsis of the scenario that you looked at and the strategies that your group came up with. Go ahead, Natalie.
Okay. So our scenario was that in a group session, say an auditorium, it was a small room, and the presenter was using a tethered microphone and kind of got tripped up with it and said, oh, I don't like to be tethered, I'd like to move around more. And somebody in the audience suggested, oh, well, we can hear you just fine, you don't need to use the microphone. And this was an interesting one because a couple of us in our group have actually had this experience. I had it recently just before COVID with some volunteers that I lead, and I was telling them that they had to use the microphone. So basically what we kind of came up with was, if you are kind of the leader of that group of presenters, you know, just encouraging them that not everybody is going to be willing to speak up if they can't hear. And regardless, just it's always better to assume that people are going to be able to hear you much more clearly and effectively by using the microphone. That it's not always just that the people can't hear you, but they're going to hear you better and get a better understanding of what you're saying. And then we also talked about how for those that maybe you can hear, but you're an audience member, but having the confidence to speak up on behalf of maybe people that wouldn't speak up, and saying that, you know, oh, I think we should use, you know, please go ahead and use the microphone so that we can hear more clearly, so that people don't have to rely on calling out those or saying, you know, can everybody hear me okay? Because we recognize from our experience that people aren't necessarily going to speak up, and of course also recognizing that it's not fair to call somebody out for the fact that they may not be able to hear. So
thank you. That one sounds like a direct action. That's it, right, Amber?
Yes, correct.
I think partly because the phrase, the saying that itself, like, oh, maybe I don't need to use a microphone, is a little less of a like, it's not so much a hostile situation in that moment. It's very easy to respond directly and say, you know, I disagree with you on that. I think you should continue using the microphone. Or how about another group?
Real quick too, I'm just thinking before we get into the next scenario, that with this scenario too, you could potentially use delay, and that you were saying we've all been in this scenario before and maybe we haven't said something, and so maybe having delay, maybe this conversation here is the delayed intervention where we talk about how could we handle that differently next time, and potentially delegate as well. Maybe we've always said it's scary to be the one that raises your hand and says, I'm the one that's asking everybody to use the microphone, but if there's 4 people at your table and you're all saying, no, we all agree that we need to have the microphone being used, then you're going to have more power in the multiple people saying something.
Madeline, did I see your hand?
Yeah, I was going to share for our scenario. So our case study says you are a student in a doctoral program. You're in a class with about 16 students. You know from the first day that Blair uses they, them pronouns, but after sort of a breakout session, coming back, the spokesperson for our group, Sarah, misgendered or used the wrong pronouns for Blair. And we sort of thought a direct action could be addressing, you know, in the moment, Sarah, oh, I noticed you used she for Blair, and I just want to make sure that we're using their correct preferred pronouns, they, them. We thought a delay strategy could be talking to Blair after the fact to check in with them and see how that situation was, if there's anything we maybe could have done differently or handled it differently. And then a delegate strategy, we thought checking with the professor after the fact, you know, letting them know just of their role in the class, and that they, you know, have power of the situation and can highlight correct pronoun usage next time that happens too. So it does help sort of coming from the professor, the sort of expert in the room sometimes, but yes.
Yeah, thank you for that. That definitely sounded like a multi-pronged approach. I know one piece that I think we usually bring up when this scenario is discussed is also not to feel like, to try to handle it in a way that directs attention towards the student that misgendered the other student without that, I'm trying to basically say without that student then stumbling over themselves to, oh, I can't believe what I've done, and drawing more attention to the situation, but trying to figure out a way to help that student correct the behavior, maybe make some statement more broadly around, let's be mindful of the fact that you can't assume the pronouns that someone uses unless, especially given the situation where everyone in the class actually shared them. But without also drawing that kind of attention to the situation where it may make Blair feel a little bit more at the center of focus when they probably don't want to be.
Yeah, and I mentioned to this group that this was a situation that actually happened in one of my PhD courses. And again, being compassionate with all players. Obviously the person using the wrong pronouns didn't do it necessarily to be mean. They did it because they were not paying attention. That doesn't make it okay, but that, you know, understanding where they're coming from. I know that the person whose pronouns they were misusing was upset by it, and we did check in with that person, and then being compassionate with the professor as well, because part of it was like, well, our professor should have known to do something, but also it turns out professors are juggling multiple things while they're teaching a class. And the professor, it just kind of swooped over the professor's head in that moment. And so having that discussion after the fact was really helpful to move forward. And I think this came up if anybody went to the Genderverse presentation yesterday of not having this profusive, this is kind of what Bryce is saying, not having this profusive apology that we definitely, in one of my classes, I had someone who continued to use the wrong pronoun with someone and then sent them an email with an extensive apology asking if they could go out to lunch so that this person could teach them about pronouns, and that's not their job, you know. And so that was all about the person who didn't understand pronouns and not the person that they were apologizing to. And so being clear that it's your work to do it, that you don't put that back on that person.
Amber, if I can jump off of that, and then I'll get to our scenario. Our LGBT Resource Center has a really great acronym for that: ACT, apologize, correct, and try again. Try again is not quite right, but it's basically do it right, move forward, pay attention, all of those things. And if I can remember to find the website, I'll put that in the resources page.
Thank you. Yeah, I love that. People are, when they have, it's like they don't know what to do. And so they just keep digging themselves into this hole, and it just makes things worse over and over and over.
And I've been there too. I've done that. And then I learned that I'm like, oh, this makes sense. So my group had scenario 2, which was we were part of, let me look at it again real quick. I want to get the terminology right. The sexual assault response team on campus, and we were with a student going to visit the dean of students to look at the academic plan for this individual. While we're there, we get a notice on our phones that the school has released an alert about safety and alcohol use after going to a frat party. And the administrative assistant behind the desk exclaims, girls need to be held accountable for the amount they drink. They shouldn't go to parties in sketchy neighborhoods, and they shouldn't dress half naked. They are clearly asking for it. And this administrator has been with the university for 30 plus years and is well liked by faculty and staff. And we look over and we see our student is uncomfortable. So what do we do? So we had a lot of discussion initially around those words, those beliefs, how that message has been shared throughout time, though the language may have changed, the connotation is still the same. And what we talked about was checking in with the student first, maybe even stepping out to check in with that student, knowing everything around it and now having this comment come out. Addressing the administrative assistant, but not in front of that student, as to not add additional trauma to the situation. We're going to meet with the dean, share this with the dean as well as our concerns. And then we also talked about potentially for our MSU in Michigan, we have the Office of Institutional Equity filing a report with OIE as well. So even though this person's been there for a long time, it doesn't excuse them from not learning. And team, if I missed anything, please add.
The other thing I want to add is I was a little heated in our group because they consider this a microaggression now by objectifying girls, but even 40 years ago in college and so forth, everyone was very vocal about saying that as if it was our responsibility and so forth. And so 40 years later, it's still our responsibility, but it's the quiet whispers, and it's just not okay that we have not come. It's still an issue, and so it's just really shameful of our society to still be there.
Yeah, we've been fighting this for decades, and it still feels like we've not made a lot of headway. And even above and beyond that, that we don't pay attention to the fact that folks in the LGBTQ community are assaulted in higher percentages than anyone else. And so paying attention to those things as well. I think we just like to think it's a dichotomy of boys and girls and they're all white in those scenarios, and that's not the case.
If the fourth group would like to share, I'm not saying that you absolutely have to if you don't feel comfortable, but we have just a couple minutes to hear if you wanted to share the outcome of your discussion as well.
Just because we have a couple minutes left while we're waiting, I'm going to pop up our contact information so that if you'd like to contact Bryce and I, you can do so. Can everyone see that? Oops, that's the first screen. That's not helping anyone. Ah, there we go. Can you see that?
Yep.
Thanks. I guess in the last couple of minutes, if there's any additional questions or clarification or comments, I'd love to hear what y'all think.
I just want to thank you both for putting together something that gives us kind of a practical exercise, and I wish that more of these types of presentations, wouldn't just present, here are some of the issues, but would give us those opportunities to break out in small groups and try out different scenarios, because I think that's the next step of where we need to go in a lot of these conversations. So I just want to thank you guys for putting that together. Thank you both.
Thank you. Yeah, I always want to have and then what? What do we do next? Thank you for this information. Information is great. Research is great. But what do I do with that so that I actually make a change in my world?
One thing I want to add, Amber, and I think about this as a mother, is that it'd be great if we were really incorporating this in early childhood and in elementary school, so that we change those language that the teachers are using, the language that the parents are allowed to use in those rooms, the way that, oh, look, Bobby's got a little girlfriend already. Oh, please, let's not even talk about that in kindergarten or first grade. And so I think we really need to focus on those early, because it's so ingrained in our culture that if we don't start somewhere, especially schools have our children for 8 hours a day and sometimes more. And that's a place to really focus on this so that they're learning correct language. For example, the whole, girls don't like math. Well, if you have a female teacher who keeps poo-pooing it or saying things like 1 and 1 is 2 as opposed to 1 plus 1 equals, and using correct terminology. It's the same thing. They keep sending these hidden messages. And so I think we really need to focus on that education with teachers. And if you're going to go in and you're going to teach, then it's not just the content, but it's about humanity. It's about society. It's about everything that goes along with that.
I agree. And I feel like we're kind of working backwards, that we get to college, especially with sexual assault prevention, we talk about consent and pieces like that, but we haven't taught students how to communicate in general, much less talk about sex. And if we'd started those conversations earlier on, not saying that we're necessarily talking about consent, but we can talk about consent at any age. and then be able to have those students actually have the skill of intervening early on rather than expecting that they're all of a sudden going to learn it in college. Well, feel free to reach out to us and let us know any questions or comments you have. Bryce and I are hoping to at some point collect some research on participants' experience with this presentation, so that we can see if you're actually using the interventions afterwards. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all.